Garden tour, July 20th. So things are looking a little hopefully there will be a second flush. The not wild geranium, but the hardy geranium, it didn't really reflush, just a few flower heads here and there, so I'm not sure how to get it to do a second flush. The turtle heads look like they may be getting a bud, but they are taking forever to bloom. The Amsonia, even though I cut it back by a third after it bloomed, it's still fairly large. So the dahlias that I planted in between are really struggling. So I probably won't do that next year. The Gomphrena is finally getting some size, but not really impressed with it. So if I do it again next year, I'll probably just do a few plants here and there and not use it as a border. These ferns are probably not getting enough water, and they're getting too much sun. I've been told they're a Japanese painted fern, but they really don't look good. So I'm going to dig them out this fall and move them to total shade. The lungworts are looking really good. The hydrangeas have a black spot fungus. I really tried to cut it all out, but I couldn't without cutting down the entire plant. So we're just trying to make do. Not sure what I'll do if it's going to get a black spot fungus every single year. These hydrangeas have the black spot fungus really bad as well, and I've taken a lot of leaves out several times. So not real happy about hydrangeas. I wonder if there's a disease-resistant variety. The swamp milkweed is getting another flush of flowers. The bees really went and did a number on all of the flowers, so you can see they all pollinated, and I have some seed pods. So I'll collect some seeds this fall. And then the grasses are hanging in there. This black-eyed Susan vine is not doing well. It gets enough sun, so I'm not sure what the problem is. The mugwort I've cut back a number of times. Guess I'm just gonna have to cut it all the way down to the ground next time. The hollyhocks are doing pretty well, considering the Japanese beetles have been eating them. And there's a comfrey back there, trying not to let it take over. The celosia is not very tall, so I'm not sure why it's not growing. Some of the hollyhocks are bigger than others. There's a wild geranium in there, and some pincushions and more celosia. And then I have my dahlias that go along the back. And some random bulbs planted, I don't know, maybe 50, and 3 only came up. Ridiculous. My dianthus has not rebloomed. So the dianthus and hardy geranium just doesn't ever rebloom for me, so I'm not going to cut it back next year. My yellow loosestrife looks pretty. I can't wait for it to get bigger. Pincushions you can barely see, but this is about to flower. And I have my rose bush that came as a little tiny plant this spring. And my marshmallow. The marshmallow plant is quite large. And then this celosia looks great. Hard to believe it was struggling this spring. But unfortunately, the celosia, the marshmallow, and the rose are all too close together, so I'm going to have to move something. Well, the celosia is just an annual, so I'm going to have to move the marshmallow or the rose. And I do have lavender along the front here. And then my autumn sedum joy does not look like it's doing very well. Not sure why. And then I have a couple more marshmallow plants and my echinacea back there. And then my borage looks to be pretty well spent. Doesn't really look very good. I'll probably pull it out. And then I have a lemon balm and a chamomile back there. And more mugwort and a comfrey. So these tomatoes are hanging in there after the squirrels tried to chew them down. The marigolds have no problems growing. Not sure why the peppers are struggling. Have you ever seen tinier pepper plants? Ridiculous. Basil, it's hanging in there. The holy basil looks pretty good for having been half dead when I planted it. And the cucumber plant. Oh, looks like the squirrels got my tomato plant again. Just tired of those squirrels. So we'll be getting more cucumbers along the back of the bed. They should start producing in a couple of weeks. And we have a couple of zucchini and some more peppers and an awful lot of marigold. A couple more tomato plants and some more pepper plants in here that aren't doing well. I also have a lemon verbena that's struggling, although it looks better now than it has, and a French tarragon that has been struggling. My sorrel looks okay. I tried to dig it up and move it, but it was so root bound, so it's rebounding after me trying to dig it up. My pole beans getting tall. I don't see any beans yet though. And I have my herbs in the bed back there. Some sage, oregano, thyme. Some more tomatoes that the squirrels tried to chew. Another tomato. some basil behind the tomato, and a rosemary. Some more lemon verbena. And then I have nasturtium and chamomile. I have another zucchini. Behind the zucchini, I have another lemon verbena, but it's dying, so I might as well just pull that out. For some reason, my chamomile is really struggling to flower. Like, the flowers all look deformed, so I'm not sure if the birds are getting them or some other insect. But the calendula is doing okay. The Swiss chard is doing really, really well. And then I have green beans behind that tomato plant. And the wildflower garden is pretty much dying. I just don't think it's been rainy enough, so I'm just letting it die instead of watering it. I also don't think it gets enough sun back there. And then you can see my little shade garden probably doesn't get enough shade. And I have pumpkins. My Mexican sunflower. That's the Tithonia. Right in front of the oak leaf hydrangea. And then I have more basil planted along here. And then I have those little plants are the green and gold. I forget what the botanical name is. But the basil is doing really well in here. It's a lime basil. It smells excellent. This calendula gets a lot more sun, and it's doing really, really well. I harvest it every single morning. I cut back a lot that was in the middle of this bed because some of the plants were struggling to get enough sun, so I took out some cosmos that were overgrown and some other plants. And you can see the sunflowers back there, the mahogany splendor, and some frosted explosion grasses. So the snapdragons aren't doing very well, but at least they did grow, so that was a plus, growing them from seed. And the rabbits have eaten a lot in here, so like that's my only Crispidia plant that wasn't eaten by the rabbits. So hopefully these other Crispidia plants will start to bloom soon. But you can see my salvia is really tall. It's looking good. Just wasn't expecting it to be that tall. My Spilanthes plants, I totally planted them in the wrong place because they're so small. They should have been up front. But now that the cosmos are gone, it's getting more sun. You can see a snapdragon, black-eyed Susans. And then I have a few more calendula plants growing. I cut back the Shasta daisy, so the new blooms should start in a couple weeks. And then the Baptisia I had to cut back because it was splayed open. It got so top heavy with the seed pods. So it doesn't really look very good now, but next year I'll cut it back immediately after it blooms so it won't get so top heavy. And then that is my shrubby St. John's wort. I need to figure out how to prune it so that it stays more bush-like instead of so floppy. And you can see there's a celosia right in there. There's more snapdragons everywhere, but I really can't see them. And then the balloon flowers are starting to rebound from having been eaten by the bunnies. But they really ate them pretty much down to the ground, so they're going to take a while to rebound. So the white, I think it's cupcake or afternoon white cosmos are doing really, really well. They're very much more upright than some of the other cosmos. And they look really good with the dark night or black night scabiosa. The lavender plants are starting to put on new blooms after I had to cut it all back. And the anise hyssop I harvested, so I pretty much took a lot of it out. And then my cardinal flower is blooming. Another swamp milkweed that I planted here late in the summer. And then this area needs a lot of work. I want to replace the Rose of Sharon bushes with a hardy hibiscus. I think it'll cover up the pool equipment and look pretty all summer. I love in a puff. Looks pretty good. It's just climbing all over the fence and the azalea. Shasta daisy is growing. And this Agastache, these two I need to move because I don't think they get enough sun here. So they're reaching for the sun. So they're pretty leggy and leaning. This catmint is looking really good. No matter how much I cut it back, it still blooms. And then this rose bush has been through a lot with the Japanese beetles and other bugs eating it. And the Russian sage. So I've been working on the shade garden, adding different plants with different textures, trying to make up for all the strappy mess that is the irises and daffodils. It might look better next year when I put a few more hostas in here. But you can see some of these plants will take off and get bigger. But meanwhile, the irises are just kind of ugly. Caryopteris just doesn't get enough sun. All my hellebore babies that I still have to plant. And the shade garden back here is looking pretty good, but it needs more watering because it was starting to turn a little crispy. I added some more ferns. You can't see them. Most of them are just roots. The bunny rabbit that keeps coming in the yard under the fence has pretty much eaten quite a number of my plants, to include all my new phlox. The phlox just didn't grow, so I don't think it's getting enough sun. And you can see the bee balm has a lot of powdery mildew and it just doesn't look good. The Joe Pye weed starting to bloom. And I really cut back the evening primrose, one to prevent it from self-seeding, and because in the heat of the summer it starts to look really bad, so it just doesn't look good. But eventually the black-eyed Susans will bloom and hopefully get big enough to cover up some of that mess. You can see that black-eyed Susan. It's just not getting very big, so maybe it doesn't get enough sun. And then the Pinnacle hydrangea is looking pretty good. It's the biggest it's ever been. It's not flopping like last year, so however I pruned it this year seems to have worked. But then we haven't had any bad storms, so hopefully it won't suffer if we do get one. And then this Baptisia looks pretty good. And then I have a couple of pots, mint and some more basil, spearmint and more basil. So that's pretty much it for this garden update. Have a great day.